So, TPP, and I'm going to say that, number one, I am not an expert on TPP or TTIP, but I thought I'd like to share the information that we have access to, and that if anyone on the committee would like further information on that, we'll help in any way that we can in terms of gathering that and providing that to you. Basically, if you're looking at what's going to TPP countries, the 11 other countries that they're discussing in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, number one, when it says fish and crustaceans, that number is driven highly by lobster exports. Mineral fuel and bitumen, that, again, we've been looking at that as kind of a pass-through for Maine. Wood and paper products definitely are large in terms of the Pacific Rim. Electronics and industrial machinery, aircraft parts, edible fruit and nuts, that's again driven by blueberries, and pulp. So those are some of the what Maine's sending into those 11 countries in particular. And then we dug down a little bit in terms of, okay, for all of our major exports, which ones really have some onerous duties on them? And where we see if there was an FTA, are there any economic advantages to Maine industries with an FTA in place? So these are I think we had 3 different countries that specifically looked of interest, and 2 of them of some high volume. We export about $70 million of products to Japan. A lot of that we have frozen blueberries, very well valued as an antioxidant and for health properties. We've had a few of our major blueberry exporters that have really focused on Japan in the last 20 years. Their tariffs are running between 6 and 9.6%. Our biotech industries, it's been, again, building, and it runs at about a 3% tariff, which doesn't seem like much, but some of these guys are working on very small margins, so a 3% can make or break a deal compared to Europe or whoever else they're going up against. Generally, it's Europe versus U.S. on the biotech. Container bags, I'm not quite sure if these are our friends over in Lewiston, Auburn area, but I have a sneaky suspicion there are a couple of people that are making these particular textile manufactured bags that are used for a number of different corrosive industries, and that's running at around 8%. And lobster, Japan, the tariff is not huge, although the 5%, again, gets very large when you're talking about high dollar value items. This one always surprises me, but I think that it's definitely, I've talked to a few of the boat builders. It's like selling coal to Newcastle, but New Zealand is known for its sailing fleets and for its yacht making, and yet they still like to buy our yachts and our boats. So those guys, and I know that I've talked to both Hinckley and Sabre, and actually even with Hodgdon Yachts, again, there's about a 5% tariff, and New Zealand has spiked up to at least double that in certain years. One of the most interesting markets, and I'll go into this at the end, is Vietnam. Again, you've got a market that has a very it's similar in some ways to China, Korea, the Japan of old. You've got a really building middle class and upper class, and more interest in terms of purchasing high-end products. Lobster has taken off in the last couple of years, and even with a pretty high duty right now, with 10% duty, there's definitely an appetite for some of our higher-end food products, and I know even with the blueberry industry, that's going to be a further target market that some of the wild blueberry industry is going after. Paper and paperboard definitely looks like some protectionist tariffs that are being slapped on there at 25%, and not very much in terms of our exports because of that. On the EU side, these were EU, for the most part, doesn't have huge tariffs on our goods and vice versa, but these were some that came to light. And again, when you start talking about some of our natural resource products, the EU was for many, many years the #1 market for the lobster industry. They've diversified over to Asia now. But if you take a peek at that 20% and 8% tariff, and once you get a high dollar value, US dollar value that we have on the exchange rate right now, it makes it more and more difficult. Again, the yacht and boat building market, that's a significant market, traditional market for all of our boat builders. Aircraft turbines, Pratt & Whitney has a number of sales going into Europe every year. Those are probably what we started seeing as some of the higher tariffs that our main processors were facing when selling Europe. I wanted to close with this, and Spencer Fuller from Cozy Harbor Seafood was supposed to be here with me because he's obviously has a lot more experience in the lobster industry than I do, but I will try to communicate the things that he was mentioning to me, and that we're hearing a lot. This just shows you what happened after the U.S.-South Korea FTA for Maine lobster. The top line on that represents live lobster. The middle line is prepared or frozen, but with value added. And it's basically made all the difference in terms of taking off. And part of that was we had about $500,000 that was sold in 2011, and then after 2 years of the FTA, it's up to $5.6 million. The thing that's really concerning the lobster industry is that, and we don't know exactly when it's going to kick in, but that the Canadian EU FTA is basically passing through and going to go into effect before anything like this goes into effect with the TTIP. And our processors are really concerned on that front because it's our #1 competitor, Canada, and it's going to make immediately our product 20% more expensive. And we're already more expensive most of the time because Canada sells smaller sizes than we do. We're, I think, much more sustainable, and I think that's a good thing in the long term. We've at a disadvantage most of the time against, and especially right now, against the Canadian dollar, which has tanked because of it's so tied with oil prices and mineral prices. But then when we're starting to talk about, come January, that they're not going to have a 20% duty, if it's on track with what they were saying, Europe's going to pretty much be dead for the industry. So that is what everybody has been talking about at the Brussels Seafood Show, at the Boston Show, and it's in our top 3 exports. So I have a little bit of concern around that, and also of staying competitive on a world market. And as I said, I'm not an expert in terms of trade policy, and there's plenty of things that I think have potential impact for us on the import side. But we're very export oriented, and so that's the news that we're hearing through our companies and what their concerns are as they're looking at the landscape over the next couple of years. So that's my closing slide.
Thank you, Janine. Any questions?